Hi, this is Ryan Rey. I'm the theory, piano, and logic instructor at Pyramind's ground campus. And for this video, I'm going to be looking at Paranoid Android by one of my all-time favorite bands, Radiohead. This is off of their 1997 album, OK Computer, which just hit the 20th anniversary recently. It's a couple months ago, I think. And this is a great song to look at. There's a lot of interesting things going on within it, and it kind of shows us sort of the inner workings of a lot of what Radiohead does in many of their other tracks, because they're often using a lot of really advanced techniques and really interesting musical devices and things like that. So we'll kind of get a sense of how Radiohead ticks, in essence, just by looking at this this one song. So in this one, there are a variety of techniques that are being used, from pedal points, changing meters and odd meter, using modes, mode mixture, even using cadences, and as well as a really cool effect called planing or parallel harmony. But the biggest element, I'd say by far, in this as well as many of their other tracks is the use of chromaticism. So what chromaticism is when you sort of mix in other notes of the chromatic scale into your diatonic scale. So in most cases, when you're working with a song, writing a song, you might be staying in major or minor, something like that, and you'll have 7 notes, right? If we're thinking C major, for example, you'll have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then C again. So 7 out of the 12 notes available. With chromaticism, that allows you to draw in the sharps and flats, the accidentals that are in there. In many cases, you're using chromaticism or the other notes to either spice up your chords or do something interesting, or have it push the harmony in a certain way. Occasionally, it's a way to sort of transition from one area to another. It can really be used for a number of different things, but usually it's to sort of heighten the emotional impact or interest of the song. So diving into this track, I'm just going to look at a couple of sections within this in my mock-up. The first we're going to look at is the intro, focusing on the guitar mostly. Now the intro is more or less straightforward compared to the other components of the song, but there's still some interesting things happening within it. And one of the more notable bits in this is something called a pedal point. So a pedal point is when you sort of hold the same note throughout a series of chord changes or some activity within this thing. And the way that we see it in this song is by using the guitar. There are certain notes that are continuously played throughout as other things are shifting around, and it gives this interesting shift where the harmony gets kind of dense and more mysterious because of these sort of lingering notes in there. So I'll play a little bit of the opening on my mock-up and then show you kind of what it looks like on the guitar. So here's how this part looks on guitar. What's happening is the lower notes here are going to be moving as a bass line, while these upper notes are going to stay stationary, pedaling. So this is what that opening sounds like. And then it would keep going from there. So what's interesting is that the pedal doesn't stay the entire time, but it does become a feature throughout that particular section of playing, where the fingers are stationary while a bass note moves around, and then kind of repositions. It's a very guitaristic idiom. It's something that makes a lot of sense for this particular kind of instrument because of the nature of playing. Your hand stays stationary. You don't really have to do anything. You just kind of move a little bit. You find this in a lot of other songs too, where you might actually have like one of the open strings ringing out at the same time while you're kind of moving around and doing other stuff. It can be a low note, it can be a high note. It doesn't really matter. It's just the fact that that note is sort of ringing it throughout. So that is one component of what's going on in this, and that is the pedal point idea. Another interesting feature that's happening, that is where the chromaticism comes into play, is something that we find in the last sort of chord area of it, of the progression, and what's happening in the vocal. So that last part of the chord is when we get to this open E here. That part right there, we have this open E. And up to this point, it seemed like we were probably in something that was probably C Dorian. So C Dorian is a mode very similar to C minor. In C minor, we would have C, D, E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, C. But in this case, we actually have an A natural, which is part of the progression, which gives it a slightly different vibe than if we were working in minor. But you'll notice that in C minor or C Dorian, there should be an E flat. However, when I get to this last note, I'm playing an E natural. So what does that mean? What does that do? Well, if we had an E natural in here, that's kind of like if we were sort of shifting into a more major sound, or if we're really identifying a mode that is associated with E natural in this context, that'd be a lot like having C mixolydian, which would be C, D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C. So only one note difference. Instead of being an E flat, it's an E natural, and that's what gives it this kind of interesting, mysterious sound. It wouldn't be much to really talk about if it was just in the guitar, if it was just kind of a quick thing, but it also happens in the vocals, and I'll show you what that line looks like on here. Now, please excuse the vocal samples I'm using there. It's not me singing, it's just a vocal that seemed to work for it. Now, when we look at this line, we can see it starts on C, and it kind of works through something that appears to be in this sort of C Dorian type of sound. But then when we get here, there is the E natural that comes about at the end of that progression, which gives us that sense of the mixolydian sound, or that this sort of change to a more major shift. So this is one of those instances of mixture. And this kind of thing happens all the time in Radiohead's music, where things are kind of slipping in and out using chromaticism like this, and it's kind of drifting in and out. Okay, so another section to look at in this song is one of the areas where the meter actually changes. And while that's not something that I want to talk about in depth, it essentially moves from 4/4 into 7/8. What I do want to look at is this idea of planing chords, or planing harmony. So what is planing harmony? There's a number of other terms for it. Sometimes it's called parallel harmony, sometimes it's called constant construction harmony, all sorts of terms come about. But essentially it's this. You take a chord shape, you take something that is one basic structure, and you just kind of shift it up and down. So if you're familiar with songs like Lean On Me, for example, that one just kind of moves through planing chords, going up and then down and then up and down. Those happen to be diatonic, meaning they're within the key, but it's still just sort of shifting up and down, and it's this movement of keeping the same type of shape that gives this idea of planing. We've seen this kind of use and technique in a lot of classical music, particularly in the impressionistic composers such as Debussy and Ravel, where they would do a lot of these big planing chords to just kind of give a wash of sound or a certain mood or effect, very much in the style of the day. So when we see that in here, we're getting more of a rigid form of this, the really constant structure planing harmony. And what that means is you take a chord type, like a major chord, and you keep it major as you move it up and down. Now, as you know, if you've looked at chords in a scale, they'll change from major to minor and sometimes diminished and other types. So if they were locked into just major, that means that they're going to be drifting in and out of the particular key that you're in or the scale that you're working with. So in effect, you're getting a more mysterious kind of thing, or definitely a more chromatic kind of sound. And let me just show you what section that is. So there's a little riff that starts off real mysterious, and then we get into this sort of planing chords area where the chords are going up and down. So again, those vocal samples aren't the best in there, but they kind of are placeholders for now. But hopefully you heard the chords that were just sort of shifting up and down. They're all major, essentially. So let me show you what that looks like on guitar. So the reason why this works really well for guitar is that you can make one shape with your hand and then move it around without having to change it. It just stays kind of locked in position. So in this case, I would keep something that's more like a major chord shape, like this. And I can just move it around. That's essentially what's going on there. It's just one shape, it moves around. It works really well because you just kind of keep it glued in place and move it around. So the effect is this planing with constant structure, where that stays and remains in kind of a major shape. Now, if you're looking at other chord transcriptions of the song, occasionally you'll see other extended notes and things like that. I'm kind of simplifying it into just the major chord shapes because that's essentially what's happening here. If you were to reduce that down and take away the sort of major quality and just play two notes, you end up with a power chord. And that's a very characteristic idiom of the guitar. So it's just an extension of that, and why this kind of effect is going to be found in this type of music, because it's very guitar-centered. Yeah, they're going to use other instruments for writing, but it makes a lot of sense to identify some of these elements using that instrument. The last element of the song that I'm going to look at is sort of in the middle section, that sort of this cooling off period, almost a breakdown, if you will, where we just get these really big chorus vocal sounds, and we're getting just a descending chromatic bass line for at least a good portion of it. And again, this is using chromaticism because it's using notes outside of the scale. But the effect here is something that just adds more emotional drive and pull, much in the same way a really famous old piece, Dido's Lament by Purcell. If you want to look at that one, that's an older one. But there's a descending bass line that kind of happens throughout, and it's really like this ostinatoing figure. It's a pattern that keeps going down and down and down, and then it starts over again and repeats. So an ostinato is this repeating figure like that. In the case of this song, we're just getting portions that are a descending chromatic bass line, but the effect is very similar in that we're getting this really emotionally driven kind of moment. So I'll cue that and play that section. So again, those vocal samples sound a bit funny, but again, they're just kind of showing you how things are working together. So it starts off with this descending bass line where we see this thing happening right here, where it's just falling and falling by half step, really gradual, before finally kind of shifting more to a kind of diatonic movement within the chords. So there's this moment where it just kind of drifts and kind of sinks slowly and slowly, and I think it really fits the mood here, because again, we have really big emotional shifts in this song, and it goes from this kind of moving rhythmic thing to a really aggressive thing to a really kind of calm, relaxed mood. It's really, lamenting, and then we get back at the end into this really aggressive fast part before it finally comes to an end. So to kind of sum it all up, there's so much that could be said about this particular track, and I could go on and on about even more details of this thing, but I wanted to keep it kind of concise to just a couple of elements, but really focusing on this idea of chromaticism, which is a really big element that you'll find in a lot of Radiohead's music, amongst other things. But we can already see that there's a number of reasons and motives behind using chromaticism, from it being an emotional thing, like this middle section with the descending bass line, to something that's more like a planing chord effect, where it's an idiom of the guitar, and then getting into things that are sort of more of a mix of things, like the intro part with the guitar using pedal point and a little bit of shifting with chromaticism to provide some mixture effect. So all those things, amongst others, really add to the awesomeness of Radiohead, which is why it's one of my favorite bands of all times. They're awesome. So that's all I'm going to say for now. Let us know what you think. If is there stuff that you want me to keep talking about this one, or questions you have about it, let us know in the comment section. There are the tracks that you like by Radiohead that you'd like us to dig into. Are you interested in the rhythm of Radiohead? I've really focused on the pitch material here, but there's so much that can be looked at from rhythm. So if you like that, let us know. And I've got some other ideas in the works that I'm developing at the moment, so you'll probably see me in another breakdown. But until then, see you next time. Bye.
If you're a music producer, subscribe to our channel and stay up to date on the latest Pyramind tutorial videos, track breakdowns, elite sessions, and more. Visit us at pyramind.com.